So I'm Lesley Ann. I'm going to be hosting this episode. And is it possible for you to introduce yourself? Your name, what film you're in, and your role, please?
Oh, hi, I'm Coreon, the director of African Beauty. I'm from Angola originally, and Portugal as well, as I'm from both heritages, and that was my documentary.
Great. My name is Elena Nenasheva, and I'm the director of the film Perfection. And I'm originally from Russia, but I live here for a while.
And both films had quite a lot of impact behind them and themes, very important themes that you wanted to tell. Can you explain a bit about why you chose that topic and chose, I don't know if you've written this as well, obviously it's a documentary, but why those themes you chose to explore those?
You can just always start.
Go ahead.
Let's mix it up. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, initially I'm theater director, so I was working on the performance about human body, and it had different parts like historical, scientific, but also documental. And for the documental parts, our actors they had a task to go and to find the most exciting or strange or interesting stories about different issues which people have with their bodies. And actually we got a lot of insane stories. And so one of the story was the story of this woman who made a surgery, and then she came back to the doctor and she asked to give her previous nose back. And I was really impressed with the story. And so when I started to study here in film school, I just decided to make a script based on this story. And I think that the topic which inspired me is how often we try to be perfect and we just can't stop in the right moment. And there are so many requirements for everybody in the modern world. It's getting a little bit better with years, I guess, but it's still a lot on our shoulders. And sometimes you just stop in the right moment and just try to love yourself as you are.
Well, so obviously what got me interested in researching obviously African beauty is something that I got asked a lot myself because I was born in Angola. I'm Angolan. I also have Portuguese heritage, so part of my family has European heritage. But then I grew up in the United States. And the funny thing is, everywhere in the world that I go, I'm often misidentified. And whenever I say I'm African, I've always gotten, but you don't look African. And a lot of other people, I think, of similar experience have always gotten that. And depending on what part of Africa people are from that I was with, whenever we get that question, we're like, but why? So that's how I got started with that. I had done a previous project that was more so about, I would say, the sunnier side of things, which was Bangalogia, which was more about style, aesthetics, art, why I think African inspiration was becoming a big thing, and I did that in 2016. And this topic really stuck with me, especially during the pandemic, which is actually when I started filming, which was an added challenge of directing something during like lockdowns in different places. And yeah, I just reached out to a bunch of creative professionals, especially, and people who I knew in social media. I was like, would you like to talk about this topic? And very happy that a lot of them took it on board. And you know, we're not too scared to talk about it.
And it's interesting that both of you all come from the idea of beauty and perfection, as you called your piece, but came from it from very different angles. One's doc, one's fiction, but I assume, like any other film, there will be challenges. You touched a little bit on, you know, COVID. Were there any particular challenges that you encountered? Because obviously it's also quite a big topic you're trying to address. So maybe how did you, did you face those challenges to be able to tell this specific story?
Well, in terms of my biggest challenge, obviously aside from the pandemic, not being able to move, not being able to be, I think this was the very first time where I was making a documentary where I was not really physically present with most of the people involved. It was like all remote strategies that were utilized in making it, so I think that also kind of shaped how it was made. But I think the biggest challenge that I faced were there are a lot of people who even though professionally and publicly in their practice, espouse to being people who promote diversity, people who want to promote different kinds of beauty, body positivity, etc. Most of them pulled out of doing interviews or requested interviews were removed because although they're very happy with, I would say, being activists as trend, they don't really want to be associated with a deeper conversation behind when we talk about these various topics. Because obviously, yes, I'm talking about African beauty, but African beauty is very ample, as we saw. It's 55 continents, diverse group of people, different cultures within. Just like if I were to speak about European beauty or Asian beauty, it would be a very similar thing because it's very many different things to many people. And as much as there are people who really purport themselves as being advocates or activists, etc., at the end of the day, they did not really want to stand behind some of the messages that they kind of promote. Some of them very famously in very big media. So that I think that was a challenge, but I think that was the most surprising challenge because a lot of it was they were like on board, but then they were like, oh, this is getting very real, and pulling out. So I'd say that was one of them, and obviously the other really big challenge is I think it affects every filmmaker almost everywhere, but I think especially African filmmakers, is a lack of support and ways to fund your work. Because obviously a lot of this was collaborative and self-funded, but that is still a really big challenge, and especially when your work is insightful as opposed to fatalistic. Because if I were going to make something very depressing about what it is to be African and how horrible things were going, and there's a bunch of really depressed people complaining about how horrible their lives were and they were very unsuccessful, I would probably get, everyone would want to fund this, every possible co-production entity and person, like a professional would love, but if I'm talking about things that are insightful about real life and real issues that I think most of the world faces, differently in every part, but they do, but so that's not really of interest, on top of it already being very difficult to get any kind of funding or co-production opportunities when you're from most of Africa.
Yeah, I would say that because it was just my second short film, and 95% of the crew they were just students from filmmaking school, so we obviously didn't have enough of experience, and so it was ambitious to name film perfection because it's obviously not perfect, and now you can see it. But I think the first problem is the lack of experience. When you just face some problems which you have never faced before, and we were ambitious because we shoot this film just in 2 days, and there are 5 different locations, so it's like pretty tough schedule, I would say. And the second problem is the same, it's just the budget. Because you're an independent filmmaker, I didn't have any funding. I just earned some money, and I just spent my own money on the film. Yeah, so, and unfortunately, it makes you do some compromises. So I think like every filmmaker dreams to have like an excellent producer who will come with an appropriate funding, and then you won't have such a gap between the initial idea in your head and the final result.
And we talked about the challenges, but what were some moments or a moment that sticks with you that you found to be the most impactful or the most memorable? It can be on set or just in terms of the process of making.
I have to think.
Oh, you well, I think the most impactful for me was, for one, that the world was completely upside down, and that there were people who were willing to take the time, even with because like obviously I filmed this between 2021, in which especially like Portugal, Angola, Spain, and even parts of Poland were like locked down. Mozambique was also like locked down, and the fact that people took the time, that I had obviously collaborators who were brave enough to also be part of this, but the people were able to take the time and make the best effort to present their best thoughts and ideas around such a complex topic that really, like, and the ones that stuck through and that didn't ask me to cut them from them. so that was to me the most impactful, and what I really value and treasure about this project in particular, is because I think had it been done maybe now, but we don't have so many restrictions, I would have had something else, but to me is the thoughtfulness and the time that people took, even with all the challenges that the whole world was facing at the time that, that this was being made.
Yeah, I would say probably about a particular moment, because during the first day, the end of shooting day was late at night, and there was a moment when our leading actress, who actually is amazing and she has a lot of patience, especially with the student crew, and there was a moment when she just gave me a hug, and I don't know, it just somehow in my heart, because I think usually the director is somebody who just supports and inspires everybody, but we're also human beings, so we also need kind of support of others, so it was a nice moment.
And obviously you would want your audience to take away something. So if it was one message you would want everyone to take away from your film, what would that be?
I would probably say that very often, actually nobody cares about other people, I would say. What I mean is that everybody is so focused on ourselves that actually we can just relax. When we don't like something in ourselves, when something is not perfect enough in ourselves, it's more about our own perception than the perception of the entire world. And there is always somebody who will love this imperfection in you. So I think the most important thing is just to try to accept yourself and try to understand that beauty is so subjective and it's so diverse, and it always depends on you, and it always depends on the eyes of the person who's looking at you. So just basically relax and love yourself.
Well, as for what I have to say is just be open to having conversations, and especially listening in conversations, because I think a lot of the times nowadays people are they're talking to other people so that they can get their point across, or so that they can be right, as opposed to actually listening and trying to understand and empathize with the other side as well. So I think that's the message that I would have.
Amazing. So I'm not going to take all of the questions. Does anyone have any questions for our filmmakers? No questions at all? Okay. I'll ask one more. Obviously, we have our own films, and they're our babies, but we saw other films here this evening. What is one thing that you can say to everyone that you saw from someone else's film that you liked personally?
I personally probably was mostly impressed with the second short film about males and females. I think that there is a really beautiful cinematography of this piece, and I think that that's actually an excellent example when you have powerful story. You have just one location, you have two strong actors, and as a result you have a powerful message. And I think this movie probably impressed me mostly, and I would love to meet somebody who created this one.
Well, I would say, I'll just speak generally actually. I was very moved and impressed by the focus on framing things in a way that is not the obvious. Because, for example, in all of the movies, or films, sorry, none of them were what you expected. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about each of them, because when they're presented, for example, for the very first one, if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't really know it's a queer story until it tells you it is. But it's done in a very, again, simple way. In the same one, the movie about, obviously, people dealing with the trans identity of their deceased child and reconcile that with their culture. That, I think, is a kind of story that we're often not told. And a lot of the times we're also not told the other perspective. Because, unfortunately, yes, it is very important to tell the perspective of someone who does feel oppressed by a system, but then what do their parents feel? So that to me, because obviously sometimes we don't think about that. We think about the quote-unquote aggressor. or the cultural aggression, but not the impact that that has on the person who may be doing it, regardless of motivation. Or your film, for example, the fact that people who are very attractive actors, but then they're talking about, I don't feel perfect, but the rest of the world says, that's in your head. But then obviously that's very internal. So the fact that, that there are all these journeys, but they do kind of take you by surprise. I think that's what I enjoy most.
And what's next for, and that's the eternal question for film.
Yeah.
What's next? Or what are you hoping that will be next?
Yeah, I have actually a script which is already finished. Now I just to earn enough of money, just not to have all these budgeting problems in the next film. But it will be a story of the composer who betrays his real love just for being in the zone of comfort, and as a result he has to pay with his talent for this decision.
Well, as for me, I'm really a very present-focused person. So in terms of next projects, can't quite say, but in terms of currently, as I still do work as a commercial producer, I've been doing a lot of work still mainly in Portuguese-speaking Africa with TV. I think you saw during the documentary behind the scenes of a soap opera of a telenovela that was being produced. I was actually part of the crew of that particular project, and still am of ongoing things. And hopefully just get the opportunity to make more. Not obviously work that I do in my class, which I'm very grateful for, which if I was not being able to do, I would not be able to make this myself. But also get the opportunity to make my own stories.
Yeah. Thank you. If there are no more questions, sure, last opportunity. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your films with us. They were really insightful, and I think it's quite serendipitous that it's two filmmakers with very similar topics, exploring very similar themes, but taken from such different angles to be able to look at it. So, I think very interesting. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.